Okay, cool. So we are now live. This is the first step live that we're going to be doing for InstaView. Hi guys, my name is Nathan. One of the creators. In fact, I would call myself the co-creator of InstaView. William wasn't able to make it today. However, I believe he's going to be available in the comment sections, and he will be replying directly to any questions that that you guys ask. Hey guys. So I'm gonna just first of all start off before we delve on the topic of racism, because we have a few people who would like to speak on that topic. If you have anything that you want to say on the topic, or if you have any points that you want to be made, please do request and feel free to hop on. These live streams are really just to engage our viewers, to engage you guys, and to hear what you guys have to say about it. Hey William. So first of all, what is Step Correct? What are we doing? I would say that we have created this platform. We created Step Correct and what it was to be in its entirety, or what it was to be up until this point now, about 2 years ago. And the whole purpose of Step Correct, as it stood, was basically that it would allow people to get their opinions heard, get their voices heard, and that meant young people. So the young people had the ability to speak, and they had a platform for themselves. As we have been seeing, young people don't get that opportunity to be heard. They don't get the opportunity to voice their opinions because they're often misconstrued as frivolous. Hey William, so yeah, like as I said earlier, William's gonna be here. Any questions you guys ask, he should be able to answer directly, even though he wasn't able to co-host this. So yeah, as Step Correct was that young people are often shown and misconstrued as like frivolous, that they don't know what they're thinking about, and that they don't really get their opinions to be heard. If we look in politics, we look in the news, a lot of what's being shown to us and a lot of what's being given to us is for the older generation. And we felt that having Step Correct, it was that we can encourage young people to step correct, that they can move forwards in the right direction, but also we can allow young people to have their opinions heard. So that's what InstaView was. InstaView is where we interview young people, where we interview people doing things, pushing forwards, and helping them to get their opinion put forwards. And on the topic of opinion, hey Tyrell, today we are going to discuss racism. So, with everything that has been going on recently, with all of the protests, with all of the riots, and with all of the... David, are you really playing PlayStation right now?
Yep.
Honestly. With all of the protests, with all of the riots, and there's no sound. Nah, I think there is sound, bro. Otherwise people would have said, hey Amy. So with all of the protests and with all of the riots that have been going on right now, racism has now come to light again. And it's always been something that's been around. It's always been something that's been here. But the thing is, now people are starting to change how they think about it, because I feel like, oh, it's something that, oh no, everyone's talking about racism, so let me stand on the right side. Let me stand with the people. But do people actually believe this? Do you feel that people are actually getting involved in the protests because they want to look good? Or do you feel like they actually can connect with the people who are suffering? With the people who have been going through racial discrimination for all of these years, for all of this time. Racism is something that hasn't ever had an ending, and it's something that's going to continue to happen as this pseudoscience pursues to be taught to us, to be introduced, and to be put into our systems. We see that, like, what I mean by that is that we have our education system, which only shows Black history in a month, that we have certain days that are given to people, when realistically, should it not be Black history all year? Should it not be learning about these things all of the time? I would like to hear your opinion on that. So first of all, I have my co-host going to join right now. And yeah, so she's a part of InstaView and Step Correct, and we're just going to ask her for her opinions, her viewing on that. I've actually pressed accept, so it's up to her to join. Hi, Atian. Atian is also a member of Step Correct, and if Atian would like to appear and have his say on the topics of today, then that would be great. And you declined. Okay, cool. So, first of all, let's go with Tyrell because I see that coming up. So we'll see how this goes.
Hi, my phone is always slow when I go live, so I don't even know if I'm actually moving or sounding like making any sound. So,
Okay, cool.
hello. Um,
Hey, yeah, we can hear you. It's fine.
okay, yeah. I mean, I've got a hat because we're all in quarantine and we haven't gone to the barbers, and I'm really dusty right now, so I'm not gonna show anyone. I'm gonna save everyone's eyes. Um,
Okay.
so today we're talking about racism, just in the UK or just like in general.
Let's talk about UK because that's a lot closer to home.
Definitely. I think that racism starts even from the way that we're taught history. So, for example, we're not taught that all of. I think what Western society tries to do is that they've made racism taboo, but they haven't actually. They've done more to pretend that it doesn't exist than to actually fix it. So I think what they like to do is be like, oh, well, we captured black people for a little while, we brought them over here and we made them work for us. But, in the end, it's this happy ending and now they're equal to us and now nothing happens to them. And I think that's a really crazy thing they try to do. It's almost like gaslighting us because when we talk about race, they just, how could you? Like, let's not talk about that right now. That's uncomfortable. Like, people don't want to discuss it and it'll never truly get fixed, especially with the nature of Britain. I think we're always stuck comparing to America. At least we're not them, At least we don't have trailer park people, but it's still bad over here, I think.
Okay. So what would you say as a, because I know you, Tyrell. I think for some of our members, I don't actually know. I'm gonna quickly say hi to Nicholas and hi to Jonelle. What would you say your experience with racism has been like, especially being a young black boy in the UK?
Well, my experience is really strange because I think that I've never quite. I think society really likes boxes, and I've never really fit neatly into anything. And so, visually, obviously, it's quite clear where I'm from. But in terms of personality and interest and stuff like that, I've always been someone who's a bit more bookish. And so I've kind of noticed that growing up is that there's not just resistance from other people who will say like, you're smart for a black person. Like I've literally heard that. Can you believe it? Or they'll say you're very articulate for a black person, or they'll say you shouldn't speak like that. You're black. Black people don't speak smart. Like it's really stupid. But also with teachers that I would have to do more than other students to actually be noticed that I like books, that I'm smart apparently. That it will take longer for people to even notice that, or for teachers to value my work as much as the students, even students who were still black like me, but were just a bit like more white featured, which I found really strange, and I never really saw it as that big of a deal, and I never wanted to. But when it hits you in the face like that, it's like, wow, is the world really like that?
Hmm.
I had a really bad experience where I went on Child Genius, and when I was on Child Genius, the camera producer people thingy, they went through my school, and they encountered my English teacher who happened to be like, "What are you filming for? Are you filming for Tyrell? Well, Tyrell, he's not very smart. It's just his memory. He's just good at memory. He's not smart, and he never pays attention in class, and he has bad attitude." And she actually had to be sent back to diversity training because she said some more things, which I'd rather not talk about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that was the most obvious experience, I guess.
Yeah. So do you feel that racism is something that is, how do you feel that institutionalized racism, such as your experience with your teacher, um, could be tackled?
I think that it's really about. I think firstly we have to lift the lid off of the conversation. We need to stop. We need to stop sparing people's feelings, and we need to tell them, I don't care if you're hurt personally as a white person that we are talking about this subject, or even some black people, might want to I guess it's hard to accept. You don't want to. I think it's real. So what we have to do is really open up the conversation, and then after we've opened up that conversation, we need to realize that Black people are not a monolith. There are all different kinds of Black people. We all have different kinds of beliefs. You know, there was Blexit in America recently, which is where a lot of Black people, not Brexit, which sounds similar, right? Where they left the Democratic Party, they all went to the Conservative side. Now, I don't really subscribe to politics, but that was a huge move in terms of Black people saying we don't all think the same, and thinking something doesn't make one person less Black, and dismantling people's implicit bias and people's assumptions about Black people when they see them, some that they know that they're doing and some that they don't even realize, would really help with that, I think. So,
Mm,
yeah.
I hear you. And you say, and some black people as well. How do you feel that black people, how do you feel about black people as black people, we treat each other? Do you feel that, like, for example, I know that you've been spoken to differently by black people or by your own kind, and they look at you and they say, "Oh, well, you're not black, you're not this." How do you feel that black people treat each other in terms of racism?
I think that we have this thing where I think as a race, we're aware that we have a lot of people who are very insecure in their blackness and in they want to be something else. And so we see these kind of people, you know, we might call them sellouts. We might use other stronger words, right? And so I feel that we 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 kind of use a black person's personality as a check in the first 5 seconds to say, okay, are they comfortable in their blackness? Are they gonna embrace me as another black person? How do they feel about that? And so I think that we have boxed ourselves in unintentionally. And so when people see someone like me who might act a bit more white, apparently, they would think that he doesn't want to be black. He's not proud of his blackness. And therefore, that's met with hostility because people think he's a sellout. He just wants to be. He probably I don't know subscribes to some racist ideology, you know,
Mm.
and
So,
especially
yeah,
yeah.
go on, go on, go on.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, I think that as Black people, we really think that we really have this thing of like, if you haven't struggled, you're not Black, and so people would assume that that maybe I don't come from the same place as them. I mean, I grew up in South London. That's what else can I say? Like I was in the same area, I just don't sound like I was there, and so people would assume maybe I don't know that I was a rich Black person, and so they would also treat me different because of that kind of the status thing, and they don't really feel like
Yeah,
we're on the same team, you know.
yeah. So, how would you tackle that? How would you say that we could address this as an issue and help us as a community to actually work together to strive towards, it's going to sound cringe, unity?
Well, that's. I think that's a really good question. Actually, I think that in terms of what can we do, I think it's all about in our everyday life. Everyone has to dismantle their implicit biases, their ideas of what is black. I think that we don't even realize sometimes that we have these stereotypes. Don't even realize that they are applied to us every day in our everyday lives. And so I think in order to reach unity, it's just about realizing that we have this thing in common, our skin, and we need to disregard other petty differences. I think there was someone who was a very big figure who said, we are a community that is cursed by tiny differences. And I think that is very true. I think that that really speaks to Black people that we find a tiny thing. Look at your eyes, look at your nose, look at your skin. You're different from us. You're a bit different. You have it easier. Look at your money, you know, instead of realizing, hey, we're all Black here and we all will eventually face this issue unless you're
Hmm.
super rich. And even then, you know, money clearly hasn't been able to save Black people. Look at, I don't know, Bill Cosby. So
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, yeah, that guy, yeah.
yeah.
So, okay, so let's look at London and what's happened recently with all of the protests, with those EDL people getting involved and exposing themselves essentially. How does all of this, being on your doorstep, someone who grew up in London, going to school in London, how does that make you feel?
I think it makes me feel disappointed. I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. I think we've really seen the true nature of the media when they try and say counter protesters when there were basically no black people out there protesting. It's just racists out there. And the fact that no one has acknowledged that, I think British people were very prideful, we're very arrogant. We're like, yeah, British people, we aren't racist. It's just Americans. So we pretend that we don't see the person right next to us who has a flag for a political party that wants to basically kick out all immigrants, stuff like that. So I think it's always been right on our doorsteps. And anyone who's surprised, well, I'd say they're very lucky, right? I think most of us have always known these people have been around and this was going to happen. At least now they've exposed themselves. I'm excited to see what people have to say about that.
What do you think about the statue? Because I know a lot of there's been a lot of diversity on the opinions of the statue being pulled down. So what would you say your views on it are?
I mean, I'm very happy to. Oh my god! I'm so happy to see them gone because I think it's really stupid that they even had statues of these people up. Like, don't you think it's ridiculous that as a country we're so prideful. Back to the prideful thing, that we're like, oh, forget all of the racist things this person's done. Remember when they, I don't know, built our country? Let's put a statue of them and let's pretend that history doesn't have racism embedded into it. So I'm very happy, and I'm sure that's going to be in history. And one day people are going to learn that people pulled down statues, and I'm very happy to hear about that. I mean, I know they've boxed up Churchill now.
Yeah. Do you feel like the act of boxing up Churchill is because they know of the wrongs that he's done? Do you feel like they have intentionally boxed up to cause more problems?
Now that you mention
what are your opinions on Churchill?
Oh, I mean, I didn't know much about him. I'm not a history person. I'm not very, I would say I'm historically challenged. I don't really like history. I don't care about it. Now I do, right? But before I didn't. But so I didn't really know much about Churchill at all. I didn't even really know why he's that popular. But I mean, let me not sound dumb right now. I mean, I know his history and stuff, and he has a bad side to him, and people boxing him up is symbolic. I think it's like there's always been this racism around, and they've always tried to hide it. And I think that is literally the physical version of them hiding racism that is embedded into this country. This country is built on racism. I think that is the most obvious sign of it. So I hope someone tears that box down. I mean.
And the last question that I'm going to ask you for today is how often or how strongly has racism affected you?
I'd say that it's quite strongly affected me. Like, it's never been outright things, but I think the totaling up of everything has such a huge role of where I am today and a lot of my experiences in life. I think that especially bias has played a large part in how I've been treated, because I think people meet my behavior much worse because I don't fit a black stereotype. And so I think that's played a lot into how I've been treated in schools by teachers and by students, and how a student who was white would have probably gotten more support in school and would have had their issues that with that and with other students addressed more accordingly. And so the place that I've had to be through and having been through those experiences has been really rough because it's never been blatant, and only now I'm just picking it apart how every single thing has played into what's going on today. So I'm still quite confused about it, and I couldn't really quantify how much it's affected my life, but I'm very certain that it has,
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Tyrell. You made great points, and you done more, even though we couldn't see your face. But thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to add the co-host, finally, who's going to join us today as we go back to the original topics of what interview is and
I'm back. I'm back.
Hey, there you are.
No, First of all, I just want to say sorry, guys, obviously, for not being able to come here earlier. I was a bit sick, very sick, in fact, vomited. I went to do a 5K, didn't eat. You don't really know how it goes. It gets like that sometimes. But it's good to be back, to be sparking convo. So yeah,
How did the 5K go?
it was good. It was good. I ran about 5.1K in 28 minutes, so it wasn't too bad.
That's good. That's good. That's all we want to see. What was this for again?
People power fundraising. So yeah, just to raise
Do you
some
want to
funds.
describe what that is? People
So
Power.
basically, the People Power Network is a youth network created by me and a girl called Aaliyah York. Shout out Aaliyah, she's doing bits, by the way. And I guess like the whole purpose of it is to fight educational inequality, whether that be within the system or maybe closer to home. So just fighting educational inequality is basically the main point of like People Power, basically.
Okay, that's cool. So, as we go on to today's two topics, where we're just going to give an introduction onto what InstaView is, Step Correct, and on racism, do you feel that we should first talk about InstaView and Step Correct?
I feel like you really explained that, to be fair, honestly. I feel like we should just move on to racism, like really and truly.
So as Tyrell was saying, he doesn't know much about history as a black person, but he feels that it is something very important. And he doesn't know the history of Winston Churchill and why that recent topic of him being teared down in Croydon is being brought up. Would you like to shine some light on that? I know you have a few opinions.
In terms of like, the history of racism.
Let's talk about Winston Churchill right now, as that's a topic.
See, to be fair, I haven't actually done my research on Winston Churchill to like conclusively give you evidence that this guy is like a full like racist, but like I know that like there is evidence of him being a racist. So for me, it's not very difficult. Like if a guy's a racist, he's a racist.
Yeah.
Take his statue down, take the mural down. But for me, that's not the main goal. For me, when it comes to racism, I'm thinking about the systematic and systemic sort of use of racism rather than old dead figures. I feel like it's more important to focus on the living racists than the dead ones. But for me, I can't say don't take the mural down or don't take the statue down. They're well within their right to do that. But for me personally, I'd focus more on the living racists than the dead ones.
I feel like the statues that were put up, they were created in I want to say a blind society, because I really don't feel like they knew what they were doing. But then part of me is like, no, they knew what they were doing. They knew that this guy had bad things, that he was involved in like slave trade or involved in racial comments and remarks and how they treated people, but they just didn't care. And I feel like they left it up there. They knew these things and they just said, well, if people find out about it later, then it'll be too late because it'll already be in the system. It'll already be something like a landmark. So people aren't really going to tear down a landmark, but as we're seeing recently, people are. So I feel like tearing down a landmark, tearing down a statue like that, I personally feel like it's excessive but important, because it shows that, no, this person done bad things, but it needed to be done.
It is important. I just feel like when it comes to the BLM movement and Black Lives Matter in general, I think that the movement lacks a bit of leadership and direction, which is the only thing for me. I mean, I went to one of the protests last week, and everything I was hearing was to do with like George Floyd and I can't breathe, I can't breathe. I think it's very important to raise light on those issues. But in the UK, it wasn't the UK. I don't want to separate the UK from America because they're pretty much the same thing. But in the UK, it was more like a thing where we were talking about American issues rather than the issues in the UK. And so it's a thing where I feel like there needs to be a bit more leadership and people need to be clear on what exactly they're demanding. Don't just go to a protest because you want to go to a protest and you want to have a bit of fun and you want to make it look like you're on the right side of history. Go to a protest because you actually want to make change and you're actually demanding something which is progressive and not something which is regressive.
Yeah. See, this is what I said earlier, that it looks like racism has always been a topic and it always will be a topic until it's like until no one sees race, until no one sees that. And I was saying earlier that it looks like a lot of people are getting involved because they want to look like they're on the right side of history, because they want to look like they're on the right side, in front of their friends, in front of their family, on their social media, such as this Russian woman who I saw who fake staged a protest behind her so it would look like she was involved in a post. And I'm just like, wow, this is how far people want to go just to show their involvement, to show that they're important in it. And I see a lot of teachers that are doing this now, a lot of teachers who are posting these things, who are saying, oh yeah, we agree with it, but then in the school they're being racist or they're showing prejudice towards students.
And I think it's important that before we sort of like home in on specific instances of racism, we talk about where it comes from and the notion of race in the beginning, so that we can now see the sort of modern day applications of it, if you know what I mean. Okay. So when we talk about racism, we're talking about a notion, an ideology, which was created by wealthy capitalists, European capitalists, to validate the trading of slaves. And this was during the transatlantic slave trade, so like around like the 1600s, 1700s. This is when the notion began. And basically what it's based off is a pseudoscience. It's not real. Like, you have to understand that me being black and you being mixed race is not real. Like, it's biologically unreal. It is a social construct that was created based on science that doesn't exist, that can't really be proven. So basically the whole point of racism was to state that black people and other races were inferior genetically and morally to other races, basically, well, to white people, basically. And so that's basically the whole sort of backstory to racism in the first place. And then a system was created to sort of put that together and make it look like black people were then inferior to white people, even though that's not the case. And so we've had about 400 years of oppression, whether that be slavery or colonialism, which is all tied into that, to make black people, to give black people an inferiority complex, and on the opposite, give white people a superiority complex, even though it doesn't exist. We're all the same. However, we cannot deny the experience that we've all had to suffer due to what isn't real, but it has been sort of, it's very hard to explain, because although I love to say that race isn't real, we can't deny the experience that we've suffered because of people's perception that it is real.
Yeah.
That's basically what I'm saying.
So if you could define quickly the difference between colorism and racism, because I know a lot of people seem to conflate the two and it looks like it's the same thing.
So like racism is like the belief that like a race is superior to another race, right? And this was created by European capitalist scientists based on the pseudoscience. Colorism is a child of racism. So colorism is the belief that like sort of like lighter skin is better, and that's a child of racism because there was a social hierarchy, right? And so the lighter your skin, the more superior you were deemed. So think of, you know, the feudal system, right? Like the triangle. You have the king, knights, the king, noblemen like knights, and then peasants and serfs and things like that. Yeah, think of that, and then inside each group there's another spectrum of lighter to darker, and that's basically colorism inside the sort of racist structure. So colorism is a child of racism, and racism is a child of capitalism.
I see a lot of black people, as you know, myself, yourself, putting each other down because of colorism. That is almost, I think it's colorism or interclass racism. It's like you look at someone who's lighter, and a lot of black people want to be lighter, and a lot of lighter people want to be darker, and no one really likes those who are in between, and it really puts people down. How would you say that we tackle this? Because surely black people would have to be united if we want to see a movement.
I just think it just starts with education. It starts with understanding why you think that lighter skin is more superior. Why do you think you have to assimilate? Why do you think you have to do these things? Once you start to question your perceptions that have been given to you by society, then you'll start to change your sort of perceptions, because people just, in their mind, they're thinking, oh, this person's lighter, they must be more beautiful. This person's lighter, they must be more superior. But really think about what you're actually thinking about, in a sense. Like, ask yourself, oh, my cat's just talking about, ask yourself why you think these are the case, and then educate yourself, and then realize it's because of 400 years of oppression, which has caused an anti-black sentiment in black people to now think that blackness is associated with poverty and inferiority, which is why that you perceive lighter skin to be superior. And then understand that, and then once you understand that and you educate yourself, you're like, okay, cool. I don't really want to align with those beliefs anymore, because nobody comes out the womb and they think that lighter skin is superior. Society teaches them that lighter skin is superior, whether that be through the media, and the depiction of like lighter females as more beautiful and darker females as less beautiful. That's seen in Tom and Jerry as well, with the mammy figure, an archetypal African American who seems like somebody who's uneducated and less desired. So they do that as well through the media. So you really have to ask yourself why you believe these things. If the answer is society's made you believe these things and you've learned it just growing up with your surroundings, the same process that you use to learn it is the same process that you can use to unlearn it.
Yeah. I see Tyrell typing here. He says that I think it's even perpetuated because racists feel the need to matter in some way because of the lack of individual importance in society. Yes, and even the other races like Asian, Latino, where is it? Asian, Latino, there is colorism, there's rampant colorism. There is also, oh, I have to take it off my dock because I can't read this. It's also an extension of bias linked to skin tone. Dark skin, for example, is seen as hypermasculine, criminal, or even lower class on certain societies, or light skin is seen as, oh, I can't see the last one. Light skin is seen as feminine, hence why light women are the common preference.
Yeah, so that is the case. Were you gonna say something?
No, go on.
Okay, because I was gonna say, like, that is the case, but it didn't just start like that. Like, what happened is we've been engineered by society through media, through the depiction of Black people, to have these beliefs about races. Like, for example, like as I said with the media was a big part of this, of hyper masculinizing Black people in general. They over masculinized Black men, and then they masculinized Black females as well. So they did it through like the mammy figure, making the archetypal African American woman big, fat. They systematically took away the innocence that is attached to just a Black person, and that's very, very dangerous. When you systematically take away the innocence of somebody's being, somebody's existence, it's very, very dangerous. So we have to really think about what we're consuming in the media as well. Even in music videos these days, a lot of the video vixens that you see are normally very light-skinned, and it's even more just being propagated nowadays as well, where you're seeing what people perceive to be superior, like more light-skinned people being in music videos, when that's not necessarily the case. They're not more beautiful because they're light-skinned. So we really have to really be thinking about what we're consuming.
Do you feel that as Black people, we allow this to happen, that we propagate this and push this forwards and say that, oh yeah, I want a light skin because she's light? Or do you feel that that's because of other people above, like in the music industry, where you have them wanting to make the money that are telling us to do this? What would you feel like?
I feel like when you have 400 years of oppression, as I've said, you've had looting, lynching, Jim Crow laws, segregation, you've had systematic racism, you've had all these sort of things. I don't see how it can be the victim's fault. I think that's another way of gaslighting, in a sense, thinking that it's our fault for not being able to handle colorism, which wasn't created by us. So I think the most important thing is to understand it's there and then work on our response. But I don't think that it's our responsibility to be thinking, oh, there's colorism here, it's our fault, we need to do more. It's not our fault. Like, this is a problem which is not only ours, it's also the oppressors as well.
Yeah. John Paul says, one thing to realize is that since white Europeans left their homes to explore the world, white superiority was established. I feel especially due to not explore the world, but I feel like it was more to do with the divide and conquer tactics, the erasal of Black history. Is erasal a word? The removing of and breaking of Black monarch statues, kings, and removing their faces, their noses to show that they weren't Black, and defacing it to make it look like it was a white-owned world.
Yeah, that is very true. That they systematically sort of erased the history of Black people, and then in a sense sort of whitewashed it to make it seem like they were the pioneers behind stuff, which is very dangerous. That's another technique of an authoritarian government, when you whitewash something, because what you've done is you've changed. Wait, 1 sec. I'm on live. Can you close the door? 1 sec. Can you close the door? I'm on live.
Come on, guys. Come on.
Okay, cool. So when you when you systematically sort of whitewash history and then you change it and you alter it so that it suits you, that's another sign of an authoritarian dictatorship.
Tyrell says, white people instilled it into us knowing it would continue as a tradition. Erasure.
That's very, very true.
On the topics of the recent protests and stuff that has happened. Wait. Tyrell says, I'm just going to do these last 2 points. It's a long-term manipulation. It's a long-term manipulation in order to establish white supremacy. This was way back in the 1500s, which led to the piloting of Africa and subsequent eliminating all achievements by any non-white races. And it just kept going. I agree. Do you think we should have John Paul, if you want to appear and say something? I don't know if it will show up while William's here. But,
I can go back and then you can add John Paul.
Yeah. So if you do want to come back, just tell us in the comments, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay, cool.
But on the topic of today, which is on racism and stuff, with the UK riots and stuff that's happened. Okay, cool. Let's add John Paul because he said yeah. So, gonna add John Paul. That was quite messy, actually. I need to work on that transition, but it will be fine. Like I will sort that one out. Don't worry. Hey.
Hi.
Okay, so tell us, what's your experience? Tell us about how racism has affected you and how you think it has been propagated to the extent that it's affecting people now.
I mean, I think it's what I've seen throughout the process, and like the main thing that I found out is that the more you look into it, this is just years and years. This is over. I mean, it's so long that it's just been piling up, and every time like a year passes, and every time there's a death and there's some form of injustice towards any person of color, there's like it builds up, and it keeps on growing, and then and then there's a breaking point where everything just goes, and then people start rising up, which is exactly what's happening now. It happened with the civil rights movement, and it's happening once again, except this time it's not only political, it's now the system itself, which is way overdue. My personal experience, is I had to hide for years the fact that I was Latino. I could pass off as white. I can pass off as white, but I had to, and that was the only way I could get some form of opportunities. And it was just an example is I did an audition. I'm an actor. I did an audition at a school, and I told them that I was a Latin person, that I had heritage, I had Native American heritage blood, and they immediately subsequently put me into a world performance course just because I was culturally diverse. That is just a clear example of that, and that is just a minimal thing. I've been stopped by police multiple times for speaking Spanish, and it just keeps on going. This issue is, the major issue that we have here is that there's black people being killed for their race. That is the number one issue, but we have to start from there and start destroying every single layer of the system, because this is pivotal for every single race that exists, and this is, if we don't do this, if nothing is done, and if we just it just happened for a week, let's pass it by, it literally would have been for nothing. We would just have to go back to what the system has taught us. There's so much history that's been erased, and I've looked into so much, specifically because I wanted to look into American history, and then I looked into British history, and I just kept on looking, and then I realized that even the concept of a different race started, I think it was around 1470 something, and that's when Europeans finally found someone that was not white. That was the first time when they actually discovered someone, and I said, and then they started deeming them inferior and as savages. They put them in zoos. King Philip of Spain put a bunch of Taínos, which were the people that inhabited Haiti and Dominican Republic, in zoos. They cut off their hands and threw them to the seas because they thought they were a bunch of savages.
Yeah.
That is just one minutia of the issue. And this is going back in history. If we go forward, there's people using this as just using this advantage to just single out specific minorities and taking them out and making them out as to be the same that we've been called for our entire lives: savages, inferior, animals, even, because there's people who have called us straight animals, and we can't. I mean, it's just
It's it's hurtful, to say the least. William has put here Spanish Inquisition in the 1400s. What do you have to say about
the Spanish Inquisition? The Spanish Inquisition, it was specific. I mean, it was mostly. It happened. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it mostly tackled just any Latin-speaking language. So any language that had a Latin root, so Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, those three, the church kind of decided to just rampant and just kind of push their law down into any form of society. This wasn't just race. This was just culture and religion. And it then extended to the people who were in South America when Cortez decided to arrive to America and kind of was responsible for making the biggest empire in the world at the time fall in one fell swoop, which were the Mayans. And after the Great Extermination, which, if for those of you who don't know, it was basically when 95% of all natives were killed in the space of 2 centuries. There's only 5%.
So as a Spanish person, or with Spanish heritage, how do you feel that racism has affected you?
I mean, I can't speak Spanish outside. I can never speak the language of my root. I can't, because I will be called an immigrant. I would be called so many things, and I would just be singled out as like, oh, this person doesn't speak English, which means they might be inferior. Let's check them. And it had happened. So, I think last time I was so pissed, and I think I posted this like a while back, that I was stopped and assumed that I had robbed something from a Tesco because I was walking out and speaking Spanish while doing so.
Wow.
Just because I was
what do you have to say about the Portuguese who took over the Africans, the black people, and said that they were descendants of, who was it, Ham, and that they should be killed because of what they done? What do you have to say about Spanish people who, you know, it makes your own heritage look bad. It makes you look bad.
I mean,
what do you have to say for that?
This is the most interesting thing with Latin blood, because I don't have Spanish blood in me. I have Spanish parts of my blood, since Latin people consist of, I think it's like 40% Indian, 25% black, 25% white, and there's like another, I don't know what the hell, like rest. So we have a weird, I mean, there's a joke that we say we're a bastardly people because we come from so many different backgrounds that we can't pinpoint one specific one, except saying that we are Native Americans. If I can do my ancestry test and it will pull up a solid 60-70% being Native American. And I can prove that to you. I haven't taken one, but I can prove that to you just because of the heritage that I have. But let's look at this. Let's look at what Spanish people have done, like over history. We have Christopher Columbus, which wasn't actually Spanish. He was Italian, hired by, I think, Catherine of Aragon to go to America, which he didn't even touch. He just touched, as I said, Haiti and Dominican Republic. He just touched that. He didn't even touch the rest of America. He just touched that island. And he deemed it to be his own kingdom. And then basically exterminated all of the Tainos. And then Cortez came in. Then basically the entire British Empire decided to arrive to the east coast of the US and decided to take over, made Jamestown. And more Europeans started going around and started to have the War of America, which is just the same thing that happened with Africa, which is just pillaging and robbing and raping, so like anything that they found in their path, because they felt they were superior. And this, and let's go back to what he told me. Spain specifically, like this. With Spanish Inquisition, Cortez, Christopher Columbus, and I think what was his name? No, Atahualpa was the guy who sold out the Mayans. Sorry, I have like a bunch of things in my head. I'm just trying to formulate a sentence properly in terms of history.
It's fine.
But
This is the last question. It's fine.
it's fine. I
Yeah.
think just looking at how Spanish have kind of erased everything that all Native Americans had done. It is disgusting, and I can, every time I meet a Spanish person, I say, "Oh no, we just like, oh no, we speak the same language with the same people." We don't. No. Your ancestors were responsible for killing way over half of my entire generation, of my entire ancestry. And you decided to, and you implied that language onto us. We speak Spanish because you decided to take over our own lands. And the only reason why we speak Spanish or Portuguese or English was because the Europeans arrived, because the native languages were decimated, burned. There used to be books, genuine books, not scrolls, books, because turns out that I think it was the Inca were the people who actually found out that they could use cow's skin, leather, to wrap around pieces of parchment and made books. And that was erased from history. They had medicine. They had like I think it's I don't remember the name of the major city in the Mayan Empire, but they had the most advanced society in all the world. They actually had genuine technology mechanisms to carry things around. It is and then in just an instance, gone.
It's terrible. Yeah, but thank you very much for your time today. And yeah, if you could say...
That's my personal side of the whole situation.
Yeah.
Just to point out that we have to start with the foundation of making Black Lives Matter, and then move slowly but surely down every single race until every human being matters, and they're not killed for their race. They're not murdered. They're not completely discriminated for having a lighter skin. This has to happen. If we don't, then we failed. With this generation has the chance to make a real change. If we don't do this now, I don't know where it will be.
It's a fair point. It's a strong point. Thank you very much. I think just hearing that point on how heavily it's affected, John Paul, how heavily it's affected, it really just shows how much they've taken away from society, how much they've taken away from people, and how heavily it's affected us all, how heavily it's affected them. So, William, what have you, just some basic thoughts on what was said?
It was really, really interesting to hear sort of like John Paul's personal like monologue of the Spanish Inquisition, because one thing that doesn't really get talked about is Spain's involvement in sort of this whole history of race as well. We don't really hear about it too often. It's sort of kept away. So it was really interesting hearing from a Native American's like point of view what exactly happened, because yes, Black people have suffered the most and we are classified as the bottom of the hierarchy, but there are other races that have also suffered at the hands of the oppressor too. And it was really, really interesting listening to what John Paul had to say. Very, very knowledgeable, I must say.
It's good to have diversity and see that it's not just us who have been affected. It's not just Black people who have been affected. Just getting that diversity in really shows that, you know, people do care about this. And I think his last point is something that really needs to be hooked onto. The fact that, yeah, Spanish have been involved. Yeah, they have been the oppressing race and they've put people down. But first of all, we need to start at the core, start at where we are now. The Black lives do matter. And then we can move on and help the others. So then we can move on and acknowledge them and rise them up. Because right now, everybody's life matters. But all lives don't matter until Black lives matter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And one of the big conflations is that people don't just seem to understand what Black Lives Matter is. We're not saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives only matter. We're not saying Black Lives Matter more. We're saying Black Lives matter because the past 400 years have sort of shown us that they don't. I mean,
Mm.
like I find it really interesting how people don't seem to understand that it's not an equal playing field. For some reason, people think that because they think that all races are equal, that's how the world views races. But that's not necessarily the case. The case of the matter is black people have suffered for the last 400 years, whether that be slavery, whether that be colonialism, whether that be lynching, Jim Crow laws, segregation, whether that be any of that stuff. And now we're standing up for ourselves and saying Black Lives Matter to the world so that you can sort of realize that we've been suffering for the last 400 years instead of thinking that we're saying our lives matter more.
Mm.
It's one of those
I
things.
don't see the point of the counter argument, the counter quoting. I don't understand how people. It's like people are literally. I read this Instagram post. It's like people are saying, "Oh, I'm being killed. I'm being hurt here," and you're saying, "Okay, but what about me?" Like you can't say people are dying out there. Okay, but what about me? Like if it doesn't apply to you, then you know it doesn't apply to. Like I don't know.
Yeah, Tyrell's hit it on the head when he says part of their privilege is getting to pretend it doesn't happen. That is one of the biggest things. When you're in a privileged position, you never see what it feels like from the oppressed's position because you're the one that's privileging from the oppression. So, for example, a lot of men don't understand what misogyny looks like, or they don't understand like the struggles that women have to go through in society. So it's the same sort of thing. When you're in privilege, you don't see because you can't see the oppression that other people are suffering from, and then you start to think that everything's equal, but it's not equal. You're just privileged to not be able to see it because you don't have to suffer from it, and that's one of the things that we have to talk about.
Yeah, we're definitely going to open up a discussion on sexism, misogyny for another day. I wanted to move on to the topic of Jim Crow laws and the fact that you can arrest someone purely on suspicion. The fact that they look dodgy, you can just say, "Oh yeah, no, he's doing something, so we're going to arrest him." If you could elaborate on Jim Crow laws for the audience, that would be great.
So Jim Crow laws are literally just laws after slavery, so after 1865, so during the Reconstruction period, and even further on from that, which sort of legalize racist sentiment. So even though, in theory, slavery was supposed to be abolished in 1865 in America, that really wasn't the case. In practicality, most black people were still, in theory, slaves. They had to go back to tenant farming, sharecropping. They had to do all those things because the only people that they knew was their master. The attitudes don't change over a day. Like they knew their master, so they'd go back to them. The only difference is that they're getting peanuts instead of getting nothing. So
Yeah.
that was basically the difference. And so Jim Crow laws are laws which like legalize segregation, things like that. So grandfather clause, for example. So the grandfather clause basically means that if this was in Louisiana and some other places, I think as well, if your grandfather could vote, you could vote. However, for the slaves that had just been, enfranchised, their grandfathers were slaves. So their grandfathers definitely couldn't vote. So therefore, black people couldn't vote. The majority of black people couldn't vote because their grandfathers were slaves who couldn't vote. So that was one of the sort of laws that they used to sort of uphold white supremacy in the South. And actually, I just thought about it. I want to touch on that law about saying that people are dodgy and suspicion, because it's not just as simple as saying that people are suspicious. We have to really think about why we think people are suspicious and who is it that we think are suspicious. And this plays into what Tyrell was talking about earlier with implicit racial bias. And basically, like, obviously, the implicit racial bias is sort of like the belief that like black men are more dangerous because we've been hyper-masculinized. And that black women are sort of angry, they're loud, because they've also been masculinized, even though they're women. And it's how that all sort of interplays into thinking that people are somehow dangerous now. And that's what we have to sort of think about.
I feel like, was it the situation with Ahmaud Arbery? that is a key example of how you can just arrest someone because of how they look suspicious. That guy was literally just running, and they decided, oh, he's in the neighborhood, and I'm sure they made up some story about it or something about what he was doing, and then felt licensed to just pull out a gun in broad daylight. I feel like people saying that, oh, white privilege doesn't happen or white privilege isn't our choice, that's because, like you said, they're blind to it. And I don't understand how someone can say, oh yeah, no, it doesn't exist. It doesn't, like, there's nothing that we can do about it, unless they are ignorant. And there are people out here now that are still saying, oh, well, I'm not racist. Did I kill you? I'm not racist. I didn't do. And I feel like the fact that ignorance isn't targeted, it isn't shown or expressed, a lot of people are just dismissing this, and they're saying, oh, well, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Ignorance is bliss. And what people need to understand is that the focus isn't on explicit sort of examples of racism. It's not on me waking up one day and saying I hate black people. That's not what we're looking at. What we're looking at is the systemic uses of racism, the systemic uses of making black people feel inferior, because we're not inferior and white people are not superior. It's making us feel that we're inferior based on the laws that they have sort of put into place. Things like the 1994 crime bill. But I don't really want to talk about America. I'd rather talk about the UK, because I think that's more close to home. So like, I'll talk about the Windrush scandal, for example. After the war, people came from the Caribbean to fix up the country. They were promised, I think, indefinite stay. And then during David Cameron's tenure, when Theresa May was the Home Secretary, she sort of muddled it all up, and then they had to get sent back during Theresa May's actual tenure as Prime Minister. And that's just an example of the sort of overt racism that we see. And I say overt on purpose because it's not covert. In the UK, the difference is they just lie to you. They just tell you that it's not racism. But it's very overt. You can see it, you can feel it, it's there, but they just lie to you. Like, covert racism is very, very different. That's being complicit in the system. There's a lot of overt racism, such as the Stephen Lawrence case, for example, where two racist thugs killed a black man, and then all of a sudden they didn't get charged, and then there had to be a whole Macpherson inquiry into the reason why a black man was killed, and the people that killed him were not charged. And it really showed all the sort of issues within the police force. And then only after they took away the double jeopardy act, which basically means that if I commit a crime and I commit it again, I won't be. Yeah, I've had some. Yeah, if I commit a crime and I commit it again, I can't be sort of convicted. So they took that away, and that's when the people that killed Stephen Lawrence were finally brought to justice. So we have to look at all those sort of overt examples of racism in the UK.
Tyrell says, it turned to mass incarceration because slavery is legal for prisoners. That's why black criminality propaganda started. They would place black people into prison, aka legal slavery for life, for jaywalking. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And citizen arrest laws are also being based in mass incarceration, and it was a part of putting black people back into free labor.
That's very true. You hit me on the head.
One thing that worries me is that it seems UK will be racist for longer than America. Definitely, because, like, as William said, it's spit in your face. And I find it so funny that even with that Windrush generation case that happened, when they said, oh, we're going to send them all back, it didn't cause a stir for the people that got sent back. I mean, it did as well, because obviously they were affected by it. It caused the stuff and problems for those in Jamaica, because I saw how the Jamaican president and a lot of them were saying, why are we going to take all of these people back? They wanted to live out there. They can come back if they want to, but you have to give us the money you promised, because you promised them a life. You promised them to have what they wanted. So you better give it back to us. And England were like, no, let's just hush on that. And then it caused a lot of racial tension in schools and in places where people were making Windrush generation into a joke. And then Brexit happened. And it's like, these things always happen, but no one actually sees it happen. They just look at it and say, oh, racism. How are you? And it's not really something that...
It's because it's because that's the thing with the English language. the English language is one of those languages that has been weaponized. So you could use the English language to sort of tell you something that's true and then make it seem like it's not true. And like obviously we did Latin for GCSE, so like we're very honest, like we're very clear, like with Latin and things like that, on looking at derivatives of the English language and looking at how it can be weaponized.
It's saying that we have 15 seconds left remaining of this live stream, so we're gonna have to come back online. I don't know what that's about, but
yeah, so I'll cut and then you can
and then
save it to your laptop and then and
we'll do a part 2 later. Thank you guys for coming.